I'd like to introduce our moderator for this program. Pamela Powers served as the Arizona State Representative for LD9 from 2017 to 2022. While there, she served on the state's Banking, Insurance, Commerce, Regulatory Affairs, and Ways and Means Committees. Pamela has a master's degree in public health from the University of Arizona. And for many years, she was managing director for the American Journal of Medicine before entering politics. Pamela is retired, or so she says, but still works part-time for the Journal, producing content, video content, and writes a Substack column entitled Powers for the People.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I think it's going to be a really interesting program. Our first speaker is Hillel Baldwin. Dr. Baldwin is a neurosurgeon with over 35 years of experience. He is board certified in neurosurgery and has served as the chief of neurosurgery and surgery at several hospitals here in Tucson, Arizona. Dr. Baldwin developed a subspecialty expertise in minimally invasive brain and spinal surgery, complex skull-based surgery, and minimally invasive pituitary surgery, leveraging his training from Barrow Neurological Institute to perform some of these first procedures of their kind in the city of Tucson and sometimes in the state of Arizona. Given his expertise in treating people with brain tumors and other central nervous system disorders, Dr. Baldwin has developed a strong interest and expertise in the effects of electromagnetic and radio frequency radiation on patient health and neurological outcomes. And so will you welcome Dr. Baldwin to the stage, and there are his slides.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Pamela. We owe you a debt of gratitude for your public service to the state of Arizona and advocating for the health of the residents of Arizona, not only on EMF issues, but also on other women's health, reproductive rights, and we appreciate your service tremendously. I also owe a debt of gratitude to the committee this evening that helped bring Dr. Devra Davis, our keynote speaker, here to Tucson tonight. When this was first proposed to me by Dr. Davis with a subtle bit of arm twisting, I enlisted the help of Elizabeth Kelly, whom you've heard from, Lisa Smith, who's also here this evening, and Russ Whitty. So this evening I have been tasked with the brief task of explaining and giving a background for our keynote speaker. And so as an introduction, I wanted to explain what is electromagnetic fields, what are they? You're going to hear an interchange of words tonight: radio frequency radiation, electromagnetic fields, and we've already established the known physiologic effects of EMFs on the brain with subsequent outcomes, including cancer. I'm going to talk this evening briefly about the intelligence and oxygen process to the brain. I'm going to talk about electromagnetic hypersensitivity, learning disabilities in children. We also know that autism, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and other neurobehavioral disorders are all related to the background radio frequency radiation that we're exposed to every day. As early as 2001, you see the high power lines there on the slide, and the childhood leukemia study was well established in that those children who lived in proximity to high power lines developed childhood leukemias. The study was contested, but later proved to be very valid. And then in 2011, International Association for Cancer Research, which is a subsidiary of the World Health Organization, also established the fact that radiofrequency radiation and brain tumors, gliomas as they are referred to, also has a relationship. What are EMFs? What is the origin of this type of energy? Well, this is the electromagnetic spectrum. And as we can see here, it ranges in everything from radio waves all the way up to radioactive frequencies. And we can see that the energy of the wave is inversely proportional to the wavelength. So we know that the 5G frequencies that we're now most concerned about are in the 600 megahertz to 47 gigahertz range. So those higher and stronger frequencies, however, those microwave frequencies, require greater density of these cell towers because of their short distance of travel, and that's why they're placed so close together. And this, of course, is an issue that is quite controversial right now. In terms of oxygen in the brain, unlike Finding Nemo, we really don't have smart fish. And why is that? We don't have smart fish because oxygen does not diffuse through water well, and so the brains of fish are not well developed. But the brains of cetaceans like porpoises and whales and dolphins are well developed. And they're well developed because they use oxygen metabolism to run their machinery in the brain using ATP and their neurons. They come up for air. So interestingly enough, the cetaceans that are exposed to radiofrequency radiation, we now have clear documented evidence of disruption in their diving patterns, disruption in their reproductive patterns, mass stranding events. And what's interesting is that when we look online to find, does radiofrequency affect cetaceans, we find more information that's substantiated and unequivocal as opposed to the sort of question that are EMFs biologically active in humans, which of course everyone who's presenting tonight strongly believes and knows that they are. This is an example of a PET scan. And so this is an experiment that goes very far back, looking at oxygen metabolism. And what the PET scan does is the patient, or subject in this particular instance, is given a radioisotope glucose that lights up on the scan. And in those days, they had a flip phone, and for 50 minutes, they exposed this particular person's brain to the cell phone with it on here on the right and off on the left. And what we see is a preferential utilization of glucose in this right frontal lobe area as opposed to normal oxygenation. And so what we're given now with this information, and this has been repeated in multiple studies, is that electromagnetic fields interrupt our brain's ability to process oxygen. And so what happens is that our cells are now compromised, and this is leading to a whole host of diseases and maladies, neurologic illness. And it's now known that the electrohypersensitivity disorder, which has been acknowledged to be about 20% of the population, in some instances 30% of the population, those people with EHS are symptomatic for this down regulation, if you will, of this oxygenation in the brain. So they have symptoms of fatigue and headaches and inability to function in high EMF environments. Now, are those the only people that are experiencing this down regulation and oxygenation? No, all of us are. All of us being exposed to this radio frequency have down regulation and oxygenation. Bluetooth radio frequency is classified as a Class 2B carcinogen by the WHO. So what's interesting is that these EHS people are essentially the canaries in the coal mine for the greater population as a whole. Wireless radiation is like a neurotoxin. It's like lead, it's like volatile substances. And Dr. Davis is going to talk about that as her background in toxicology. But we have a whole host of abnormalities that are documented in the hippocampus. There's a concept known as oxidative stress, which has to do with the mitochondrial function in the brain. The brain and the heart rely heavily on mitochondria. The mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells, and they manufacture ATP. And what happens is when they're exposed to radio frequency, there's this down regulation of oxidative stress. There's a whole concept called the nitric oxide pathway. I won't get into it, but just as recently as this year, Martin Pall released a very important paper that talks about the genesis of autism in utero. And what happens is that women who are exposed to radiofrequency radiation, we already know there's a 3 times miscarriage rate in women who are exposed to radiofrequency radiation in a controlled study done by Kaiser Permanente over 5 years ago. So not only do we have miscarriage now, but we have risk for autism, and those same pathways of downregulation of oxygenation lead to abnormalities in synaptogenesis, neurogenesis. What do those terms mean? It means the development of neural tissue in an infant brain. And so this was substantiated in mice models, where you had mice exposed to radiation who were pregnant, to radiofrequency radiation, and those who weren't exposed. And there was clear behavioral differences in terms of those mice, inability to navigate a maze, and inability to mate, social behavior. All of these abnormalities are consistent with an autistic mouse that can be manifested in humans. So right here in our state of Arizona, we have some issues. And those are that telecom wants to put cell towers on churches, and in this case, elementary school grounds. So it's Collar Elementary on the east side of this community, and also Mesa School District now has cell tower issues with essentially these school boards being targeted by industry to place these towers. And so we already know that sea mammals are affected by radiofrequency radiation so adversely, but we're willing to potentially sacrifice our children's developmental neurological function to lease a cell tower for less than what a teacher's salary and benefits would afford that school board per year. And so why is this important? It's important because we know that children's skulls are more vulnerable to wireless EMR, electromagnetic radiation. They have higher water content, and that water content leads to greater disruption in blood-brain barrier. They have more absorption. And so we have a whole host of issues, and this little diagram here shows the difference between an adult brain and pediatric brain, and we can see that the wireless radiation lights up more considerably in those pediatric brains. Brain cancer in our youth is rising. It's unequivocal. It's the most common cancer in ages 0 to 14. We have also pediatric and liver cancers rising in the last 10 years, and we have a significant increase in brain tumors in those less than 30 years old. And I saw it in my practice on the upper left. Here is a frontal glioma in a child, and here is a pontine glioma in a child. There's 2 types of pontine or brainstem tumors. Some of them have a decent prognosis in that the patients have a decent 5-year survival, but when we look at the quality of that survival in any pediatric brain tumor, the quality of that survival is really questionable. And a more aggressive type of pontine glioma at most has a lifespan of less than 24 months. So approximately almost 5,000 now, I just checked the numbers, 5,000 children and adolescents are diagnosed with brain tumors per year. So what are we to do as a citizenry, as a people, as informed individuals, when our trusted regulatory organizations fail us and fall prey to influence from industry? We have the NIH now with the research on COVID-19 and vaccine issues. We have the Canadian government who withheld important reproductive data on mRNA technology, which the FDA supported in minimizing this transparency. And then apropos to tonight's presentation, we have the Environmental Health Trust that successfully challenged the FCC in a DC Circuit Court and successfully prevailed upon them to come up with a reason why they still have 1996 radio frequency standards for cell phones when now the cell phones well exceed those limitations. And as Devra will present tonight, just breaking news in 2019, in going back and reviewing this case that they won in 2021, and because the FCC has done nothing now to respond to this court order, we found that the FCC tested their own cell phone data and withheld that from the public, and found those absorption rates, the radio frequency that comes off a cell phone, is way in excess of what are safe standards. So, I went to the grocery the other day. I saw my thoughtful, philosophical Iranian friend, and he reminded me of this quote from E.B. White of Charlotte's Web fame. Sailors have an expression about the weather. They say the weather is a great bluffer. I guess the same is true of our human society. Things can look dark, then a break shows in the clouds, and all is changed. And so, in 2019, 5 years ago, my wife, who has EHS, and I went to a radio frequency conference in Scotts Valley, and I met Devra Davis. I went up to her, introduced myself. I had seen her on TED Talks. I'd seen her in conjunction with a colleague in Australia, Charlie Teo, who's a world-leading brain tumor surgeon who thinks similar to me in that we have a real issue with radio frequency radiation. And she looked at me and said, "We need you." And so I couldn't, shy away. And so tonight's guest is not just a toxicologist, an epidemiologist, an accomplished author, but she's a devoted sister, mother, grandmother, friend. She earned her PhD from the University of Chicago. She has a master's in public health. She was a fellow at the Cancer Institute. She was the founding director for the Center of Environmental Oncology at the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute, former professor of epidemiology at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health, and founder and president, and now outgoing president, but she's still not going to go away, of the Environmental Health Trust, advocating that mobile devices and wireless radiation pose a health risk. She also worked in the Clinton administration for health and safety issues. She's an author of 4 books, and one of which is here tonight. She has over 200 publications in peer-reviewed journals. So please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Devra Davis.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here, and especially because some of you may know that Isaac Newton was once told that he had done all these great things, and he said, "If I've seen farther, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants." Well, there's a giant here in this audience that I want to acknowledge, and that's Libby Kelly. Would you please stand so we can give you a round of applause? I would not be here today if it weren't for Libby. When I first became interested in this issue, Libby reached out to me. We worked together on a number of things, including what became the U.S. Senate hearing, which was the last Senate hearing on this subject in 2009, and a major international conference that we put together. So I'm delighted to be able to be here in her hometown and acknowledge the incredible work that you've done. And as for Hillel Baldwin, he is unique and wonderful, and I hope you all recognize what a great resource you have here. As in fact, unfortunately, schools are on the block right now. And this industry is targeting school boards, and all they want is more money for the schools. And they're not aware, as most people are not aware, that a cell phone and all the wireless devices operate as two-way microwave radios. We've asked you to put your phones off. This is how I use mine. And yes, it can be a little cumbersome, but I also use it with Wi-Fi on and airplane mode on when I might need to get a call indoors. And I try not to do that very often. But that is a way to reduce your exposure as well. So this evening I'm going to talk with you about my new book. This book is really a tribute to all of the people that have worked with me, including most recently Hillel Baldwin, including several who are no longer with us, like Martin Blank, who was a real giant in the field as well, and Franz Edelkofer. And they're discussed in my book. But the foreword of the book is written by Frank Clegg, the former president of Microsoft Canada. So what's happening is now more and more people from industry are coming to us as whistleblowers or collaborators to say, look, we got to fix this, and we know we have to do it. So I'm going to talk with you about some of the solutions to this issue that I think most people recognize we need to pursue. There is an unprecedented surge in exposure. Even 4 years ago, the types of wireless radiation devices today that are in your home are without precedence. We now have, and I'm not making this up, washing machines and dryers that can talk to your phone, coffee pots that can talk to your refrigerator. Now, whether you want that or not, doesn't matter. You have to actually go to the length of turning these things off if you don't want them, and sometimes it's very difficult. I just got a pair of hearing aids. I had to get the kind that you can turn off Bluetooth, because otherwise Bluetooth is going right through your brain. Now, of course, it's a small amount of radiation. However, it's not a good idea. And it's never been tested for safety. It's just not. There are so many senseless uses. Now, AirPods, which you see in children, AirPods in children. If someone for some reason needs to use an AirPod, put it in one ear, not both. I mean, that's really just, I think, common sense. Better yet, don't use them at all. Modeling studies, as Dr. Baldwin just showed you, demonstrate children's vulnerability. Their skulls are thinner, they contain more fluid, and they heat up more rapidly as a consequence, and they absorb more microwave radiation. Experiments document that there's brain disruption, brain development, as well as brain functioning, again, as Dr. Baldwin indicated. And growing evidence indicates that cell phone radiation has a profound effect on the nervous system, on the development of the fatty sheath that protects all of the neurons we have in our bodies. That fatty sheath, by the way, isn't matured in children. Interestingly, it matures less fast in boys than girls. The reason that's of some interest, as you may know, boys get into more car accidents, they get into more accidents generally, and they're not fully myelinated. They don't myelinate until really the mid to late 20s. And myelin is thought to confer judgment and the ability to anticipate the consequences of your actions. Think about teenage boys. Think about the kinds of things that they can do just because they are physically able to do them, and sometimes they're quite foolish, and sometimes they're quite dangerous. And right now, all over the country, all over this country, and all over the world, it's the teenage boys that are fighting the wars. It's the teenage boys that are on the front line. They're not fully myelinated, and they are getting radiated at levels that they never were before without being aware of what that radiation can do to the nervous system. Studies demonstrate in teenagers cognitive, psychiatric, and other chronic impacts. We know that children of parents that use phones the most have delays in speaking. Delays in speaking. Why is that? You're supposed to babble and talk to an infant and a toddler. That's how they learn how to speak. And by the time they're a year old, children in different cultures, whether Japan, Russia, the United States, already start to babble in a distinctive pattern. But if their parents aren't talking to them because their heads are in a screen, then those children are not learning to speak as early as they should otherwise do. We are finding puzzling cancer trends, again, as Dr. Baldwin indicated, and most importantly, we know that electromagnetic fields have effects on the environment, on the actual physical environment, not just whales and mammals, as he indicated, but plants and insects. Think about this. Every living thing, from grass to insects to birds to us, has DNA within the nucleus of its cell. Every living thing. And we are seeing increasing evidence that electromagnetic fields interfere with the basic building block of life of DNA. So there are practical solutions, and I'm going to talk to about some of those at the end. But first I want to show you, and I wish I were making this up. Say hello to Sam. That is a specific anthropomorphic mannequin. We call him Sam for short. Based on a 12-pound head of a guy who was at the 98th percentile of military recruits in 1998. That's where the head comes from. And that head gets a jug of fluid poured into it, homogeneous liquid, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is your brain. Now, you may not fully appreciate this, but your brain really isn't just a bunch of liquid. It has lots of different things in it. I'm going to show you some of those in a moment. But the way the test system has been set up since 1996, it uses SAM, and it puts this dipstick into Sam's head to test how warm it will get and sets the standard to make sure that Sam doesn't get too hot. Sam doesn't talk too much, just a 6-minute phone call. And if you look carefully on the side where the phone is, that object there, right on to his left side, on the right side of the slide, there's a spacer there, a spacer up to 10 millimeters. Now, why is that important? Because every single millimeter away from the head is 15% less radiation. So by using a spacer instead of putting it right next to the head, you get a much lower amount of radiation, and you allow more radiation in to this brain. Now, the tests use this dummy. They do not use the smaller head that belong to most of us and to children, and these tests do not consider the impact on any other living things, even though we know that impact takes place. And there is an organization called the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation, ICNIRP. It's an invitation-only club with reporting to nobody and responsible to no one, with a funding that seems to come from industry, and it has set the standards. And there's been no independent group until, drum roll, Libby Kelly. And she has worked with scientists all over the world to create a new body, the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. And we believe that that group now is going to get more attention, as it should, because it does have independent voices that are weighing in on this industry without the ties to the industry itself. Now, this is just another demonstration, and our colleagues now in Porto Alegre are suffering from incredible flooding, but they have done work with us over the years to show that the deposition of radio frequency radiation in a child's brain is 2 to 10 times higher in the bone marrow of the child's skull than in the adult, and up to 30-fold greater in the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is a very important part of your brain. It is involved in memory, in balance, impulse control, and the hippocampus can be affected by this radiation, as I'm going to show you. This is the absorption that goes into the head of a 6-year-old holding a tablet. And yet I learned that in the Tucson public school system, children get a Chromebook in 1st grade. Now, they don't get to take it home, and I'm not sure how long they get to use it, but I will assert this. There is no evidence that digital learning works for a 6-year-old. There is not. Now, we have a crisis in education around the world because of what happened with the pandemic. Schools were closed. Children, particularly elementary school children, really lost out, and there's been a decline in general achievement as a result. But we show in work that we've done here, and the yellow is the hottest, that the child's skull and the eye sockets, of course, are going to absorb the greatest radiation when we model this radiation. Now, obviously, you can't really show absorption into a living human, but we have done studies recently, and our incoming president, Kent Chamberlain, has done studies on actual human skulls shortly after death. And he's been able to show the very different absorption that takes place to the parts of the brain. Now, the one part of the body that gets the highest absorption of all is the testis. You have a phone in your front pocket and it's on, whether you're talking or not. It is constantly looking for a handshake from the tower. Where are you? Here I am. Where are you? Here I am. It's an electronic handshake. And that handshake means that up to 900 times a minute, this microwave radiation is going to the tower and coming back to the phone. The closer the phone is to your body, and my phone is on airplane mode, the greater absorption you will get into your body. So that is why the first thing that fertility clinics ask men who come to them because they're having trouble getting their wives pregnant when they want to, the first thing they ask is, where do you keep your phone? And the next thing they say is, get all wireless devices off your body. This has been a fact for more than 20 years, and that is in fact how many scientists came to this issue, was recognizing it. If you look carefully at this picture here, again, the yellow and red are the hottest, and you can see the highest exposure goes right into the scrotum. Now, when we look at biochemistry of what goes on at the level of the cell, we know that there's something called reactive oxygen species. You can think of them kind of like cougars of the cells of the body. The cougar that goes around and if it finds something weak, will eat and kill it. That's what reactive oxygen species do. They find loose electrons and they gather them up, and they cause damage as a consequence. And this was a study that was done by for the Swiss government, by a major committee that they appointed of experts in Switzerland, like Mikey Mevison and others. And they concluded that the majority of animal studies and more than half of the studies of cell cultures in a petri dish showed evidence of oxidative stress caused by electromagnetic fields. And they specifically cautioned that the very young and elderly can react less efficiently to this kind of stress because as we're aging, or if we're very young, we have difficulties with repair. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit of detailed study to a group that I've been working with in Turkey on what happens to the hippocampus when you expose it to electromagnetic fields. This is the controls. You see here samples taken from the mice that were exposed prenatally, and this is the dentate gyrus, and in the control you see the healthy neurons, which are indicated here in B and C, and they're basically kind of round as they're supposed to be. And then this is what happens after 40 minutes of exposure. Again, looking at the dentate gyrus magnified, and you see here they're starting to lose their nice round shape. Cells are supposed to be regular and uniform and together. And then this is 40 minutes of cell phone radiation. And this is 60 minutes. And look here. You can almost not see the cell boundaries anymore. That's the kind of destruction that can take place in a mouse under experimentally controlled conditions when we expose them prenatally to cell phone radiation. That's what happens to the hippocampus, that critical part of the brain that helps with balance and memory. Now, the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute, which are two separate research institutes that do studies on radiofrequency radiation and many other things, they've been operating for more than 40 years. I have been a member of the board of the National Toxicology Program many years ago, and I can tell you that any time they do a study, it's well done, it's thoroughly reviewed. They have pathology, that is looking at the slides like the ones I just showed you. They have statisticians who look at samples and they don't know whether it's A, B, or C. They have no idea what compound they're evaluating for the validity of the science of what they do. And yet, when the NTP study was done for $30 million, taking 10 years, it should not have taken 10 years, but that's another story. It found clear evidence of certain types of rare tumors wrapped around the nerve inside the heart of animals, and some evidence of glioma, that tumor of the brain, which is unfortunately generally quite lethal. And they also found evidence of heart damage, cardiomyopathy, and DNA damage in both rats and mice. Remember, DNA, the basic building block of cells, is very, very important that we keep it intact and with integrity. Now, not all damaged DNA leads to cancer. It does not. However, what we do know is that when you have DNA damage, the probability of cancer is greater, because what DNA does is it signals cells to repair themselves or even tells cells to die. But if DNA is damaged, it can't function to protect the body. As Dr. Baldwin indicated, we have unexplained brain, liver, and thyroid cancers in children, especially since 2010. Now, what happened in this country in 2010? What changed in our country in 2010? The smartphone was introduced. And I cannot tell you that the smartphone is responsible for these things. But I can tell you that it is responsible for a soaring, unprecedented increase in exposures that are taking place to everyone. And all of you react to this exposure, and some of you know it. And that's our dilemma. We have colorectal cancer in young adults in the United States, Iran, England, Brazil, and now, by the way, in every industrial country where we've looked. Now, what the interesting thing here, if you can see on the upper left graph, that's the increase in incidence for colorectal cancer, all right? And the slope of the curve is steeper from 2010. Mortality was starting to go down, and now it's starting to come back up again, unfortunately. And for ages 50 to 64, you see that the rate, the incidence is going down, and so is the death rate. So what's going on here, we don't know. But let me tell you why we're very concerned. Experimental studies that my colleagues have done in laboratories, including, by the way, in Iran, show that if you take a group of colorectal cancer cells and you expose it to radiation, those cells will quadruple in growth. Colorectal cancer cells will accelerate their growth when exposed to microwave radiation. We believe, and have published a paper that says, that the increases in colorectal cancer can in part be tied to the increase in radiation that's taking place with young people with a fashionably tight clothing, putting these devices right next to their lower abdomen. And we noticed that, and point out that just because you're not talking on your phone, don't think you're not using it. It's smart, so it's using you. And all those apps you have, you can save your battery life, and you can save your own if you turn them off so they don't automatically update, and you only go to them when you need it to update. You'll be amazed how much battery life will last longer if you do that. We have reported on this 4-fold increase in young adults in the United States in colorectal cancer since 2010. Now let's be clear. This is a rare cancer in young adults. It goes from something like 0.4 per 100,000 to 1.6 per 100,000. And that is a 4-fold increase. But it's a big, big deal because we don't know what's behind it, and we have reasons to believe that one of the factors could be the increase in cell phone radiation. In epidemiology, we like to have statistical evidence, but I really want to caution you about something. Epidemiology can only tell you about the past. It tells you what happened to people years ago and how it might affect or explain the health they have now. What did you eat 40 years ago? How much exercise did you have 30 years ago? How much sunlight were you exposed to 20 years ago? Those are tough questions, and very few people can reliably answer them. And so in epidemiology, our weakest point is estimating exposure. We ask people questions to try to remember what they were exposed to, and we do case control studies when we can, comparing people who have disease with those who don't. But another tool for public health is to look at case reports. And we have a colleague in Sweden, Leonard Hardell, who has done brilliant work for more than 40 years in this field and other fields, by the way. He's also worked on pesticides and solvents. And he has presented a very interesting series of case reports recently. And these all involve what has happened to people just after 5G was installed in Sweden. In the first report, if you've ever been to Stockholm to the train station, it is a buzz. It is a buzz. There's so much electromagnetic radiation in and around that train station. It's amazing. It's like, I can't believe anybody can ever sleep. It's really high. And what happened there was that a base station was put in very close to where someone was living near the train station. That person became quite ill and asked for measurements to be made of the 5G radiation exposure. And sure enough, when the measurements were done, it was determined that there had been a 5G antenna turned on recently, and when the person left that apartment, their symptoms went away. And they thought they had been having a heart attack. That's how ill they had become. A whole family was affected in another case report when 5G was turned on, and that whole family found that when they left their home, their symptoms went away. An 8-year-old boy was found to be very reactive to another 5G. And in one case, lymphoma manifested itself rather suddenly and unexpectedly. So these are case reports from Leonard Hardell, and I suggest that we would be foolish to ignore them, because they're not epidemiologic studies and that they don't find large patterns in time and space, which is what we like to do in epidemiology, or we do case control studies. They're not that. But they could very well be the canaries in the coal mine, the sentinel indicator of what's going on for many other people. Now, my organization is a little bit like David and Goliath. We filed a lawsuit because in 2019, just before Christmas, which as Libby and Bill know, that's when an agency wants to get notices out they want nobody to pay attention to. So just before Christmas, they announced, we've decided that we're going to continue to use that then 24-year-old safety standards to test cell phones. When they put that out, Theodora Scarrato, who was then my executive director, and I frankly thought, this is crazy. And I knew for a fact that from somebody inside the agency at the time, that the chairman, who was quite loyal to President Trump, decided, enough, let's get this thing out of here. I don't want to hear any more. And basically closed the record and said, we're getting it out. Well, we sued and we challenged the scientific basis, or frankly, the lack of scientific basis for this decision, and said, how can you, in 2019, assert that last century standards apply to this century technology? It didn't even exist. And where's the evidence to support your decision? The U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals did not review the science per se. Rather, they reviewed the record, and the agency was so arrogant, it hadn't even bothered to show that it was reading the thousands of pages of scientific evidence that had been submitted, literally a stack this high. So the court said, you can't do that. You've got to show that you've at least looked at the data. And in addition, the court specifically said, there's no evidence that you've taken into account effects on wildlife. That is, on non-human animals and the physical environment. And that the effects were not set to protect wildlife at all. One of the most brilliant things I ever saw was a report that came out just the year before the agency took action, and it involves creating a three-dimensional model of the body of the honeybee. This was really brilliant work. We can model humans, of course, but it's very difficult to model such a small animal. It really is. And Arno Thielens did this first paper and perfected the imaging of the body of the honeybee. And in this paper, what you can see is that at the higher frequencies, this is 24 gigahertz, 120 gigahertz. Let me remind you, that's 24 billion cycles a second and 120 billion cycles a second. And he was able to show that 5G, which is what those frequencies would be expected to disrupt the life of the honeybee. That was a prediction. Subsequently, he showed that that was exactly what was happening. Another study done around that same time, actually I think 2 years before, looked at trees. And I want you to look carefully at this. These are two cell towers, right? And look at this side of the tree compared to this side of the tree. And you can see, if you look carefully at the base of the tree, it's like the tree is moving away, right? It's kind of hard. It's like, I don't want to be here. People who are experts in trees tell me that once the crown starts to go, that within 10 or 15 years, the tree will die. And that is something that we're seeing evidence of. It takes a long time for that damage to accrue. And again, I would submit that we don't want to wait until we have any further definitive proof. The researchers who did this paper have done a series of others, all with similar results, showing that electromagnetic radiation from mobile phone antennas harms trees over time. Now, this is a modeling study. And what this group did was to take publicly available data from Austin, Texas, showing the power density of the current network, seen here, and then modeling what will happen if 5G is fully deployed in the urban environment. You can only have 5G in an urban environment because for 5G to work, you need a 5G network, which means you need an antenna about every 100 meters, approximately 100 yards. And the way things work in the United States, every single company can have their own antenna. So on a single urban block, you might have 10 antennas right next to your bedroom window because you don't have any control over where it gets located under the current law. That is why it's so important that you work with Libby and others here to see that people are informed and understand more about why they should not be exposed to this kind of radiation. The other thing about 5G, it's a marketing dream, is that in order for it to be effective, you need a 5G router and a 5G computer and a 5G phone and a 5G dishwasher and a 5G coffee pot and maybe a 5G vaginal speaker to play music to your unborn child. And I'm not making that up. What this study showed is that if you had 5G in Austin, Texas, this is the increase, seen here with the red-brown, that you would have in power density in order to have a 5G network working fully. And the authors of this study, published in the IEEE 5G forum, concluded that 5G mobile networks cannot yet be classified as safe for the public. You betcha. There's no evidence that they're safe for the public. There's never been any evidence. No one's ever tried to get such evidence, and you know why? It doesn't exist, and it probably could not be obtained. Among other things, the 5G system to work involves beam forming. So you hold this device, and it's sending a beam to it, and sending it back. And if you're relying on satellite signals, then you have beaming coming from on top and beside. And if you're holding a baby, which you should never be holding a baby when you're on a cell phone, then that child will get radiated as well. Well, the United States and Canada and Australia have been asleep at the switch, and it's not an accident. We have a rotating door between the FCC and the industry that it regulates. It's been well established. The French government, however, has taken a different path. And I like to think that it has something to do with our dear colleague David Servan-Schreiber. David wrote the preface to the first edition of Disconnect, which was published in 2010. And in that preface, he said, "We don't want to think that our toys that we're so attached to might possibly bring our own demise." He wrote those words, and a year and a half later, he was dead of a brain tumor. Before we met in 2007, he was a self-proclaimed cell phone addict. He had 3 phones. He used them the minute the wheels hit the tarmac on airplanes. You've seen the people do that right away. Got to get on immediately. And he was on the phone quite a bit. An international traveler, MD, PhD, a brilliant, brilliant guy. And David was dead a year and a half later of a brain cancer. And we met when he was quite ill. And he said, "Now they won't believe us." I said, I think they might believe us all the more. But what happened in France is because David was not only a brilliant scientist there, he was a networker, and his family is like the Kennedys of France, Servan-Schreiber. And he was able to convene a group of 100 physicians and engineers, and he and I and Ron Herbermann organized letters and writing, and shortly thereafter, the French government put together their agency solely to look at this form of radiation and make that a mandate of this agency, that they would actually test phones, and they would test phones the way they were used. We talked about this, and we urged that phones be tested the way they were used. And we were told it's not necessary. The SAM test that I showed you is fine. The French government didn't buy it, and in 2019, they issued this guideline that said, keep radio equipment, meaning cell phones, away from the stomach of pregnant women and adolescents. They issued that as a warning in 2019. Also advising using a hands-free kit or loudspeaker. That was advice from the French government, and every phone in France that's sold comes with this advice on it. New Hampshire, it's a very independent state, as you may know. They appointed a commission on 5G. It spent a year looking at all relevant data that could be obtained. The commission, like the state, was very conservative, primarily Republican, if it's possible to have a political view and such a commission, but it was full of really independent thinkers, one of whom is Kent Chamberlain, who is chairman and professor emeritus of the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences, and the incoming president of Environmental Health Trust. He started out convinced there was no problem with cell phones. After all, if there were, he would know about it. That's what most scientists think, until they start to look at the data. He came away convinced there was a problem, and he is now championing the results of the New Hampshire Commission on 5G, specifically urging that all schools have wired networks do not have Wi-Fi in schools. They establish radiation-free zones, and that health agencies work to educate the public about how to use technology safely, including no cell towers on schools. And that, I would suggest, could be a very good platform for you all to echo when you need to talk to the school boards. Tell them to look at the 5G report of New Hampshire, which was done independently. For safer technology, it's not that hard. Unplug, disconnect. It's okay. You will survive when you do that. Sleep in the dark, eat your vegetables, pray more, and worry less. I'm not saying that just to be clever, because it's true. You need to sleep in the dark. You need to get any lights out of your bedroom, blue, green, whatever they are, and you need to sleep in total darkness. If need be, get a sleep mask if you're unable to do it otherwise. But unplug from whatever is in your bedroom, and you will be amazed at how much better you will sleep. You will. Reduce your own exposure with your phone when you must use your phone on. Wherever possible, if there is Wi-Fi, connect to Wi-Fi and airplane mode. That will save your battery. And remember that the battery is going to discharge into you when the phone is next to you. We are now working with our general counsel, Joe Sandry, who came from this industry, to get manufacturers to compete on safety. We want them to offer us safer products. We want the right to buy things that automatically go to sleep. We don't want to have to, as I'm doing, turn off Bluetooth on the hearing aids. It should be an automatic default. We don't want to have to set our routers to go to sleep when they're not on, or turn them off altogether and have a wired system. We want what the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields and our organization and many others are calling for: precaution. As Libby Kelly, who's a veteran advocate, has been saying for some time, we need as low as reasonably achievable standards, and we need to keep pressing for them. And I think that you're in a position here to make that happen because you've got remarkable leaders. Belgium has banned the sale of mobile phones designed for children. You can't sell a phone like that in Belgium. It's against the law. And you can't advertise them either. Governments and NGOs, non-governmental organizations around the world, are developing preventive policies. Not only does France issue the guidance that I told you about to teenagers and pregnant women, they also test phones. They've tested over 400 phones and found 9 out of 10 exceeded their guidelines. And by the way, their guidelines allow even more radiation than ours. We're going to have a meeting next month that Libby is coming to, and where we have been planning, with Dr. Baldwin and others' help, to bring together people who are the leaders in this field to come up with an alternative to the current system, because the current system does not provide adequate protection. And around the world today, they're postponing 5G. Latin America, Europe, the Swiss government, Swiss Re, which is one of the largest global secondary insurance companies in the world, like Lloyd's of London, in 2019 looked at the data then on 5G and declared that it was off the leash, out of control. Here is the secret. This is what we just got, the Environmental Health Trust from the FCC. Now take a second. The top one is the current legal limit. 1.6 watts per kilogram. That's the legal limit. All the other bars, which go above it, as you can see, are the test results that the FCC got in 2019 and kept secret until now. We got the data, and I made this bar graph, from the FCC, and it clearly shows that in 2019, while they were telling the court that the current standards were fine and protecting health, they went ahead and tested phones on the body, and they showed that they exceeded these outdated guidelines in 2019. And they kept it secret until we got a Freedom of Information Act answer to a question we'd asked them, and they disclosed these data as part of that answer. And we are now filing an additional petition to the FCC, forcing them to respond to the missing information that they withheld from the public. This is a public agency. It belongs to the taxpayers. It belongs to all of us. And instead it's working, and it says its goal is to improve communications by helping the industry. I want to help the industry too. I want to help them be safer. We are not anti-technology. We are pro-health. And it shouldn't be that you have to choose between the two. So at this point, I want to make sure you're aware that we have safety sheets, two-sided, on 5G, your health and the environment, and how to protect yourself. Simple things you can do in your home and with your friends and family in order to reduce your radiation. We have cards that tell you why you shouldn't keep a phone in your pocket, and particularly for young men to be aware of the long-term effect. The good news is you make a new batch of sperm every 4 months, so you just can start to be practicing safer hygiene with respect to wireless devices. And I'm really grateful to be here with all of you this evening, because I think that after years and years of work, Libby, years of work, and Bill's been supporting your efforts for a long time, I think you finally reached a different moment. And I really salute you for having done that. And thank you so much for having done this evening. Of course, I want to thank Lisa, as well as Russ and others who've worked here. And it was nice last night to meet some new old friends. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you. There are a few questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Yes, I was curious. I understood that 5G is actually can be used in applications that the military is keeping down a secret. That anything about a 5G, 6G is a weapon. And well, can you comment on that, please, what you might know about?
All right. Warfare has been radically changed recently. Drones 6 months ago could only travel 2 miles, powered often by some form of wireless radiation or a signal to a satellite. Now they can travel 12 miles. A weapon is what you make of it. This could be a weapon, right? So without going into much detail, it is certainly true that the higher frequencies have the potential to be weaponized, but it's true for many of the things that we work with in life, including, by the way, light itself. You know, you can have explosives that flash and blind people temporarily, usually, right? You know, these flash bombs that they don't, and we also have a 5G kind of super weapon that can make people feel like their skin is on fire. And that's been demonstrated. There's actually videos on our website at ehtrust.org showing the weapon that they have field tested that can stop crowds and probably cause a few heart attacks. But yes, this stuff can be weaponized, but that is not the only reason why people are trying to develop these things. And I think we need a reset. We need to rethink what we're doing with wireless radiation. I believe it belongs in the military. It belongs in places where it's restricted and where they need certain systems. I do not believe it belongs in my bedroom or my grandchildren's.
And so I'm going to introduce our panel. We do have Dr. Baldwin and Dr. Davis, obviously, who you've already met and heard from. And we're going to have a few other local people who are heroes in the field, as you've already heard. Down at the end, we have Dr. Russell Whitty. He works with the University of Arizona. He's a professor of medical imaging, optical sciences, and biomedical engineering. Dr. Whitty develops cutting-edge imaging modalities using light, ultrasound, and microwaves for biomedical and defense applications, and teaches courses on the body electric and advanced biomedical imaging technology. He also has been proactive in educating the public to the well-documented dangers of microwave radiation and the need for expanded public discourse on this important topic. We also have Elizabeth Kelly, who we've heard a lot about of her history in this struggle. And so Libby Kelly is Executive Director of the Electromagnetic Safety Alliance, located here in Tucson. And that's an NGO. She educates people about the known health effects of non-ionizing radiation. Libby produced an online EMF medical conference in 2021 and manages an international scientific group that does EMF research and publishes scientific papers that recommend policy and practical solutions for making wireless technologies safer. And then right here on the end is Lisa Smith. She's the owner of EMF Wellness, and I think I might call her at some point. Lisa Smith is a building biology certified electromagnetic radiation specialist. She owns EMF Wellness in Tucson and conducts EMF assessments of homes, schools, businesses throughout Tucson area. She is a leader of Safe Tech Tucson, which advocates for safer placement of cell phone towers and wireless infrastructure, and is the editor of their newsletter. She is co-chair of the National Call for Safe Technology, a national coalition of safe tech groups that are across the United States. And so, welcome our esteemed panel. I'm excited to hear what they have to say, and excited to hear your questions. You have some questions for me? All right. Hopefully I can read them. But first one is nice and big. So, what is the current status of 5G in Tucson? Tucson people? Libby, Russ?
Lisa, you start. Talk about this with one.
Current status are these mics on?
Yeah.
So in 2019, the 5G rollout began in earnest with the 5G small cells being placed in neighborhoods around Tucson without any notice. And then there was some steps taken by Steve Kozaczek, the Ward 6 councilman, to bring about better notification to people, but that didn't stop anything. There were protests. It seems that the rollout of these small cells has slowed down somewhat right now, but there's still a major infrastructure, the millimeter wave infrastructure is going in, I believe, in the downtown area. So Russ, do you have any more to say about that?
Yeah, so I got into this around end of 2019, 2020. My mom is here, Dr. Marlise Whitty, and we got involved because of the Catalina Vista neighborhood started to get cell towers in that area, and a lot of neighbors were concerned, and nobody seemed to be paying any attention, including some of the leadership in that neighborhood. And when I started to research, obviously I've worked with microwaves for a long time, but as I've learned over the last many years, this is something we all need to come together and have more discourse about and debate, which has not been happening in terms of some of the things we heard tonight, as well as other things. So what ended up happening when I got involved and started to learn about this, the first thing we did was send to the city council and mayor, this is in June 2020, a 13-page letter why there must be immediately a moratorium. Hillel Baldwin was on that letter, and 10 other people demanding a moratorium and a response, and your city council and mayor chose not to respond at all. So we send a month later a follow-up letter saying this is urgent. We had 2 professors in addition to a neurosurgeon demanding we need to do something, let's have a meeting. Couldn't get anybody to meet, no response again. We couldn't even get a conversation probably starting till later that year in early 2021. But a long story short, it was impossible to meet with your city council and mayor to have a conversation on this, and there's a lot of people in this room made many attempts. The best we could get was a staffed person usually, and there was never any follow-up. And they would often hide behind the city attorney in terms of what they could not do. So we eventually resorted to using notices and affidavits in 2022, since we couldn't meet with them and force anything, even though they had voted and obligated themselves to amend the ordinance, which would have required a public hearing and discussion and debate. They decided to get around their vote, which they really couldn't, on a new ordinance, and actually published a utility manual that bypassed the public. And so there's a lot of things that we need to catch up on, but the bottom line is your city council, and in some cases Pima County Board of Supervisors, does have oversight and making decisions related to these cell towers, but they are misled by city attorneys of what the laws are and their capabilities are, and that's unfortunate. So when we resorted to the notices and affidavits, the 4 different notices, about 2,000 people served or had their notices served, describing the law and all the things they were doing wrong. And these were notices that were referring to maladministration, malfeasance, and nonfeasance with all the documentation. They chose not to respond to any of those notices. So then we resorted to using affidavits, which are sworn testimony, where you need a notary to do an affidavit that's going equivalent to a judge and giving your sworn statement with penalty of perjury that you're identifying, again, crimes of maladministration, malfeasance, nonfeasance. 520 people had their affidavits served to the city council and mayor. They chose not to respond. An unrebutted affidavit stands as truth. And we've even have on video city council members stating that those documents aren't worth the paper they're printed on. Okay, so bottom line is we have solutions, we have power, but the people don't understand what an unrebutted affidavit is and how to hold their public servants accountable. You cannot have an indentured trustee, a city council member, or anybody else working there. To be honest, they're uneducated and they're being told what to do. So we have to be in their face and make sure they're representing us or have them removed. Unfortunately, people signing the affidavit is not equivalent to asserting your power and demanding action or resignations, which is really what it takes if you want to start making changes. Now, I'm just updating you on Tucson because we've had over now 520 5G cell towers installed in front of schools, in front of residents, bedroom windows, and businesses. I will say that other cities in Arizona were behind Tucson in terms of rolling out these cell towers, like Fountain Hills, who passed a moratorium through their city council mayor using the same state laws that we do. They currently have been able to stop the cell towers. It's been a fight. Prescott has very much stopped the 5G rollout there because they had a lot of people in their face and has slowed things down. So there are techniques we can do, but Tucson is in a different predicament because we've already had dramatic rollout. And I know some of you are starting to see the smart meters. I've had that at my house with TEP. So we have to understand what's going on here. I didn't want to take up the conversation, but it is important to know that Tucson is unique. We're not in a great situation because we've allowed this to happen, and we need to start coming together to figure out practical solutions on how to address the current situation.
Interesting. Okay, then the next question is, how and what can the youth do to end or further work and or stop further damage in the communities?
Our website, ehtrust.org, has information for children and their families to get informed. We think we want people to be educated, first of all. As Dr. Whitty just indicated, you got to start with your mayor and your town council. I could imagine a youth campaign to educate the mayor. And we want to educate people, because if you educate people, then you can motivate them and you can activate them. But people who are ignorant, and it sounds like your mayor and your town council have chosen to be ignorant. They can't say any longer that they weren't told. They have chosen not to pay attention to it. The federal laws, which worked in our case, in our lawsuit, EH Trust et al. Versus FCC, the law said you had, as a federal agency, you have to read the record. And they were so arrogant, they didn't even read it. It sounds like you have something very similar, and there's nothing forcing them to read it. But I can imagine that if the children of Tucson wanted to make that happen, it would make for, I hate to say it, a great television,
Right.
you know, for the kids. And frankly, they have a right to a safer environment in schools. And there are children who are so disabled by EHS that they can't go to school. It would not be that hard to create schools with safer spaces for those kinds of children. just like we did with tobacco smoke. We started out getting smoke out of the environments of children, and we ended up getting smoke out of everybody's environment. And I think that that's something to think about.
Yeah, I was going to say regarding the city council also, when they have a meeting, they have a call to the audience, and that's your opportunity to go and you get like maybe a minute or two, but you can talk about anything. There's been quite a few people going down there and talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict and things like that. So you can definitely go down there and say, you know, I'm a teenager, or I'm sensitive to this and I want you to pay attention. So you have power and you can educate them at the call of the audience, and that gets on the official record. So next question. Is it worse to have a cell phone or a Wi-Fi router in your bedroom?
You have to, both. Why would you choose, for goodness sakes? Neither one of them. I mean, if a cell phone is on airplane mode or off and it's charging someplace not near the head of your bed, then it doesn't really matter. But I think that you will find you will sleep better. You will sleep better if you don't look at your phone just before you go to sleep, and again, first thing when you wake up. It's worth the try. Why would a router in a bedroom? I can't imagine.
It happens. I know.
I mean, if you live in an apartment and there's no choice, then turn it off. Because actually, I've been exploring now. We have a router I got from the Netherlands, and it goes to sleep. It goes to sleep except when it's needed, and it's needed not very much at all. So we can show you an Ethernet connection. That is yours handy or mine?
No,
We
it's not,
have
but
one at the Safe Tech
yeah,
Tucson
and
table
right
back
there on the back table. But now that router can sometimes be a Wi-Fi router, and so you have to have the sophistication to be able to disable the Wi-Fi signal within that router and use just the Ethernet components of it alone. And so it's not hard to do, but you have to make sure, for instance, if you're using Comcast or any of the other providers and they're giving you a router, you want to say to them, can we disable this? I visited a very prominent EMF expert in her home, and I stayed there for a week to ski approximately, and I went and looked, and lo and behold, her Wi-Fi router was on. But she told me she had whole house Ethernet. And so again, it's a very easy mistake to make. So you think you're safe, but you're not. And so I'm glad to hear you got the right router. and it's a key piece of information. And for instance, we have a rural property where I got a router from the provider. We actually happen to have fiber optic cable, which is amazing. It comes in. The router provided by Valley Telecom had settings that I could go in and set, but each time I went down to visit, and we'd spend a week or two down there and then leave, every time it got turned on again, it went back to Wi-Fi. And so we got out our meters, and of course my wife was sensitive, would come in and say, do you feel that? And so in my practice, as a neurosurgeon, if I could tell you the number of people who referred to me for possible brain tumors and symptomatology, and all I had to do was take an EMF assay, an EMF history, such as, do you sleep with your cell phone on? Do you have a Wi-Fi router? I would see so many people, and they might have a little white dot on their scan, and they referred to me for a brain tumor workup. And before I would be alone, because they're called UBOs, unidentified bright objects. And if all of us in this room, 50% of us have UBOs. I have one, or two, one. And so the irony of this is that we have this technologically acquired disease which is being manifested by symptomatology such as headaches, irritability, brain tumor-like symptoms in a population that they send to a neurosurgeon. And I'm one of the few people that can figure this out, and it's simple. And so going back to that youth question, what can the youth do? The youth can follow the title of that book, as the adults in this room can, and be an example. And that's called Disconnect. That's right. And how many of us actually do that for a full 24-hour period in our lives in any given week? See? And so that's the answer. And you wouldn't believe how wonderful that is to do, to be present and feel the person next to you. Last night we had a dinner. Unfortunately, my wife couldn't come. She threw out her back. She was very depressed. Why? Because she knew everyone at that table did not have a phone on. And we connected. And that's what youth need to do. That's what people need to do, is connect. And then use this technology. It's ironic because we've got a live feed. And how are the majority of these people receiving this live feed? Through wireless connections. Maybe not. But the majority are receiving it through wireless connections. We are broadcasting it here, by the way, through wired connection. But my point is that we are not anti-technology. We want to use this very carefully and safely.
I can tell you that Einar Fliddal in Norway is not using a wireless connection. Hi, Norway.
So we have another technology question here. What EMF meters do you recommend? And this is from somebody who says that they're hypersensitive.
Okay,
Well,
She brought one.
I got one right here. So probably the best meter right now to use is the Safe and Sound Pro 2 from Safe Living Technologies. It is expensive, it's about $400, but it gives you very, very accurate readings of how much radio frequency radiation is in your environment. Now that question was about EMFs. This is only one type of EMF. There's 4 types: electric fields, magnetic fields, radio frequency radiation, which is the wireless radiation, and then dirty electricity. So this one only measures the radio frequency radiation, which is the fastest growing EMF in our homes. And also I get a 5% discount for my business, EMF Wellness Tucson, and there's a mini version that is about $150, but it doesn't give you a digital readout, just gives you 4 colors to tell you, like, green, yellow, orange, whether you're in a safe zone or not, and that could also be useful if you're on a limited budget.
I just want to add that you need these meters because you never know where you're going to be. You could be innocently sitting right below a cell tower now. They're often hidden, camouflaged, so they could look like a tree, for example. So it's really good to know what you're being exposed to. There are no wireless ordinances that I know in this country that include monitoring on behalf of the people to see whether these cell towers are compliant with the FCC's radio frequency human exposure guidelines. We don't really know whether we're being protected or to what degree. We do know there's a big problem with those guidelines, so I'd like to mention something a little later about those, but there's no one looking after us. Our government is not saying, look, we're monitoring for you, and we find a problem. We're going to go after them and have them turn it down or shut them down because they're illegal. That's not happening. We're pushing for it, though. But I got a resolution from the City Council of Tucson in 2009, and they also, they said they wanted to repeal Section 704 of the Federal Telecommunications Act because it has a health preemption which precludes local governments from taking health into account when they're considering a permit. But this only applies to the permit hearing room. However, the industry has enlarged upon that understanding of that law by making it seem as though you just shouldn't learn about this issue at all. And it's better not to talk about it. It's really had a chilling effect on the population. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why people are actually not learning about it, because there's very few opportunities. And the city council also called for the county health department to investigate this. Well, then 4 years later, I worked with Richard Elias, the late Richard Elias, who I really respected and loved. And he got a resolution through Pima County with the same language. And shortly before Richard died, I asked him, what's been going on? Is the county going to investigate this? Are we going to expect any response from the county? And he said, sorry, no. That doesn't mean Richard wasn't trying. It's just that the pressure on them is so intense. And we've tried to get language in the city code, and we're working on a county code that would have RF monitoring built into it. But it's really an uphill battle. If anybody has any ideas how to get through, we have a draft ordinance that we'd like to present to the county. We need help to do that. We need people to show up.
So somebody here says that they get a prickly sensation in their fingertips when they're using a touch screen. I guess they're asking for advice on that.
So there is a phenomena known with computers, and this is especially true of all the metal computers. So for the computer component alone, we recommend that you use, if you're using a Mac, which primarily has a metallic body, it's probably better to get external keyboard with plasticized keys. And it's also obvious that it would be a wired keyboard, and obviously you would use a wired mouse. In terms of the touch screen, my thought would be is that, are you using the screen in airplane mode, or you're using it in send receive Wi-Fi mode? And then if that touch screen for either the laptop or the pad, the smart pad, you're probably getting some EMFs through that device. And so I have it right here. I've got my pencil, and of course, obviously, don't get the USB-C, don't get the Mac Bluetooth pencil, which I inadvertently bought when I got this, and then literally I turned it on, and I started getting this headache. And sure enough, I was sensitive to the Bluetooth coming from the pen alone. And if anybody wants to buy this pen, although I'm just going to put it on eBay. But anyway, I got to get rid of this pen, it was $70. Anyway, this is a wonderful device. This is a dumb pad pen, and you can write and maneuver and use this. And this is what I recommend you use. It also keeps your screen cleaner, and you probably have some level of electro sensitivity just from touching the screen. So that would be my answer. Anybody else have any input on that? No? Okay.
So we've been talking a lot about the proliferation of the cell phone towers in Tucson, and one of the things that the industry usually says is that they need those 5G towers for improving the signal. And so do they need it to improve the signal, or what else are they doing? Who wants
Can
to take
anybody
that?
raise their hand if they have a better cell phone signal in the last 4 years in Tucson? All right, well, you've gotten 520 5G cell towers, so apparently, no, this is not about cell phone reception, although some industry is going to doors saying, hey, you want better cell phone reception. I think Collier neighborhood actually a few people got letters saying, we're thinking of putting a tower at Collier and it might help your cell phone reception, okay? 5G is adding to 4G, which we already have with the cell phone reception. It's much more about Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies, and connecting everything and everybody to a grid like a smart city, which Tucson we know has been identified as a smart city since at least 2013, part of the ICLEI club through the Pima County Board of Supervisors and the city. And a smart city is also a surveillance city where everything is monitored. It's also related to a 15-minute city, so that's getting into the privacy aspect of what this technology is being used for. And 5G, those cell towers are only a small piece of it. You've got facial recognition, you've got cameras being installed all over the place. All of those things of smart meters, they all start fitting together and working in synergy. So that's another conversation I think we need to have.
I just wanted to ask if anyone has received anything in the mail from Verizon, T-Mobile, or AT&T asking them to sign up for their new wireless internet access program in their neighborhood. I get them all the time in my mailbox. That's what's going on here. That's what these cell towers are about. Sometimes it's the small cells that we're calling 5G small cells. Sometimes it's the macro towers that have been upgraded to 5G, but they want to take over from Cox Cable, the cable companies, so that now you can get internet access from cell towers instead of through wired connections to your home. And that's what this 5G rollout is about. Not your cell phone.
And then the other piece of this is that wired connections use a fraction of the electricity required to power these towers. And if we're really concerned about a green New Deal or green environment, we don't even have the grid structure to support this proposed electric car agenda that is on the books. And we don't even have the grid power to support all of these cell towers that are proposed on the books. And so this is a real dilemma. And if elected officials knew the efficiency with which we could get fiber optic to schools and communities, it would be transformative. And it's not that hard to do.
And I would add that fiber is faster, safer, and more secure. So if you're concerned about any of those things, fiber is much better. We have on Environmental Health Trust's website detailed explanations of the energy consumption needed for 5G antennas compared to 4G antennas. It's between 3 to 5 times more energy per tower.
Yeah,
Sorry?
I choked.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And so when in the beginning in China, when they were setting up the 5G antennas, they started turning them off at night because people didn't want them, they weren't using them, and because China, of course, they have to pay themselves for these things, we just pass it along. The industry passes along the cost to the cities often. And what we are able to show you is that 5G is an energy vampire. It's an energy vampire. It uses that much more energy than 4G. And already now, the inventors of AI, artificial intelligence, are warning that the demand for energy that will be needed by the increase of AI-related material is going to swamp our ability to produce energy. One of my other hats was as a member of the climate world for the United Nations. And we talked about energy efficiency. There's no way on Earth that 5G is efficient for energy. It is not efficient. It is, again, do you really want your coffee pot talking to your washing machine and your cell phone and your doorbell and your garage door opener? All of those things take energy. And that's what's going on now. The energy consumption is going through the roof, and it's unsustainable. No matter how much you may gain in efficiency, and you might, you're never going to gain in reducing the demand. Demand will not be able to keep up with the increase. The demand is going to swamp the efficiency gains. And every economist that looks at this has said that as well. And more information on the numbers is on our website at ehtrust.org. And a little bit is in that new book that I hope you guys are going to buy and give to everybody that you know that's a skeptic. Because it is written for people who don't know and don't know that they don't know. That's our problem. Most people, like your city council, are ignorant. And listen, they got a tough job. They got to be taking care of restaurants and garbage and fires and floods and all sorts of other things. And the level of information that's needed to make intelligent decisions about this is pretty high. And if they're not going to rely on people like you have on this panel to help them make those decisions, they're going to be flying blind. So it's important that you all work to see that the people here get a voice before your city council so that they get informed. Because once people are informed, like happened in Prescott, then they could take the right action. But if they're not informed, and right now they're playing defense, nobody likes to play defense. It's hard. You really, the best defense is a good offense. That's right. That's right.
So I thought it was really interesting in Dr. Davis's talk. She talked about how different countries are doing this differently. And so I'd like to have you guys talk a little bit about, here we have Russia and China have way more stringent, standards than the United States and Canada and other countries. And so could you comment on why that is and what we could do about it?
Well, I can talk about that. I think we all would like to speak about that. I've been following this a long time, and I know scientists all over the world, and they all understand that these guidelines are not protective. So in some countries, mainly in the Eastern Europe area, China, Italy, Belgium, as Devra said earlier, for example, and Taiwan, there's much more awareness about this technology for different reasons. I mean, Russia used to experiment with low intensity frequencies. They used it as a weapon, and so did China. They understand the capabilities of these low intensity frequencies that we're using for communications now. So they're much more cautious, and that reflects that. But unfortunately, Italy, which has been a real example for the whole world on precautionary standards, which they set back in 2000. The Italian Parliament adopted a lower threshold for exposure. Well, last December, the Italian Parliament, which is now going far right, different political climate entirely. Well, they passed a law raising that threshold from 6 volts per meter to 15 volts per meter. And we got involved at the ICBE EMF organization, and we wrote a letter analyzing the change and what the impact would be. And we translated it into Italian, and we sent that letter to all of the 20 regions of the country, to the presidents of each region, because that's the way Italy is really organized. It's like 20 different brands of ice cream, and they speak even different different Italian brands of gelato. You're right. So they really appreciate our letter, and it was just referred to in a see, I can't say it in Italian right now, but it's the National Correspondence Corriere Nazionale, I think it is. Yeah. Anyway, yesterday they reported it, that the ICBE has written a letter talking about, the impact of this change, which the reason behind it, of course, it's money, and it's affecting the change they really have wanted for years, which is they now will allow them to deploy 5G. They haven't been able to do it in that country. And they're valuing the economic benefits of that, the profits from that, over the health of the people. But these people haven't given up. I just learned today from this article that both the regions in Venice and Trento have passed a law with a 5-year moratorium on implementing this new exposure limit in their regions. So I think there will be pushback, but that's what's going on in Italy anyway.
So I have a couple also that, what about if somebody has, or they have symptoms and they think it might be EMF, but they don't necessarily know, and so where should they go? I mean, do they start with Dr. Baldwin? Obviously they need to talk to other people maybe along the way. I mean, because there are some symptoms that are common for lots of conditions.
So I did not have I had a neurosurgical practice, and I just happened to see, just to be an aware and cognizant and observant physician. I started getting calls in my office in the last couple years of my active neurosurgical practice to see EHS patients, and that's not something that I did. A very good place to start is with the naturopaths in this community. There's several. Christy Matson's in the audience this evening, and I don't know if you're still available and practicing, but she's very much aware, and you can reach out to her this evening. She's really exceptional in her field and has been very helpful for my wife and myself. So you have resources in Tucson, and that's a really good place to start. But things to do would be to disconnect and look at your environment directly. Turn off everything, go around. You could even, and do things in a selective manner. So for instance, first it would be your cell phone and your Wi-Fi router. And then if that's not helping, you can actually isolate the circuit breakers for your room where you sleep, and you can turn off the electricity specifically to your room at night, because Lisa mentioned dirty electricity. If you have a solar system, bad. Dirty electricity, we didn't even touch on it today, but it's very unhealthy. And unless it's a off-grid solar system with filters, then you have profound risk, and you even have potential biologically active cancer risk with your solar systems. If you're driving an electric car, bad. So, these are all very difficult dilemmas. There's someone in this room tonight who I recognize. I disabled the Bluetooth in her car.
I was going to say something. You've not lived until he races after your truck and disconnects your Bluetooth. You didn't even ask. Just
Yes, and it's very difficult now to find a vehicle that has Bluetooth that's disconnectable. So early Toyotas, Mercedes, Volvos, but now GM, Chrysler, good luck. My wife and I want to travel, and we don't travel a lot together, but even when I go to Jackson Hole to ski, I get a car and I can't disable the Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi. That's really problematic. and it's uncomfortable. So start methodically, go through a list. There's resources on the Environmental Health Trust website. That would be my quick answer. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say, if you think you may be electrosensitive, the first thing I would recommend that you do is to go camping. Go away into the forest, or where it's cool, because it's getting hotter here, of course, and where you have reason to believe there are no towers, and see how you feel. The Japanese have a prescription for something they call forest bathing. And there are beneficial things in the phytochemicals of the trees that have been identified that help to instill a feeling of wellness and well-being. And you all know what you feel like when you've gone hiking up the canyon, unless you're hiking up to a cell tower, which unfortunately can often be the case because towers do belong on mountains, not on people and not on schools and not on rooftops. And one of the things we're going to be disclosing, I think, at our Yale meeting coming up soon, will be monitoring that we've done on rooftops. And this is something that Libby's been talking about for decades. And part of the problem is, it's not that people are stupid, it's that they don't want to know, and they don't know what they don't know. And that's why what you can do is get better informed yourself, and then take our materials. We've got tons of cards and things that can educate other people, and please share them. That's the reason at my advanced age that I wrote this expanded edition of Disconnect with 100 pages of new material, is because I think the times have changed. The situation is even more urgent now than when I first wrote the book. So please try to use it to educate yourselves and those you love. That's why I'm doing it at this point.
I would just like to add, thank you, Devra, for saying that. Thank you. I'd just like to add that we have someone in the audience tonight I'd like to introduce to you named Susan Malloy. Susan, would you please stand up? Oh, she may have left. Oh,
There she is.
Okay, Susie, where are you?
She's in the way back.
Okay, Susie's way in the back. Susan Malloy, I met her first in California 30 years ago. She has been active on this issue at least that long. 1981, I think it is, Susan? Yeah, she had a neurological reaction and became extremely ill. And she worked her way back to health. But she is today, has multiple sensitivities, including electromagnetic sensitivity. So she founded and helped found a community up in northern Arizona called Snowflake. And then she wrote a grant to HUD to provide low-income housing for people with environmental illness. She already had done that in California, where I met her in Marin County. And she's a dynamo, but she's not a well person, but she takes extremely good care of herself. And then she jumps in her car and drives 5 hours to get down here to come to this tonight. She is a loving, caring person that I really want to express my deep appreciation to. I've learned so much from Susan. She's also serving on the statewide Arizona Council on Independent Living. And just a month ago, because of her efforts working with the State Health Department and the SLIC, which is part of the Centers for Independent Living National, they put out a brochure for people with environmental illness, which tells the people who have any manner of environmental illness what their rights are when they want to access health care. This is astounding. I think we're the first state in the country to do something like this.
That's fabulous.
Arizona, of all places, is doing this. And one more thing is we have been talking with Kelly Reynolds at the College of Public Health. She runs a department called, Environment, Community, and Policy. She had Meg DeHavis, who's another expert in this field, who's in Canada, give a talk to her students in 2019. As of this spring, she's started a course on environmental illness. And she sent me the course syllabus, and I looked at the material she's using to educate people about electromagnetic hypersensitivity. And it's very good material, I approve. And it tells me that she is really listening now. And I think she's probably the first College of Public Health in the country to introduce a syllabus about acquired environmental illness. So things are happening, and these are embedded things, like embedded in training people. We really need to train more people when they're in school about this issue as part of other environmental health issues. And the College of Public Health is doing that now. So.
I think we're going to have to cut off the panel. We've kind of gone on long, but it's been fascinating. Dr. Davis will be signing her book over there. I started reading it the other day, and I took off my Apple Watch about 10 pages into it, decided I didn't need it anymore. And so anyway, they're going to be around if you want to ask them more questions. I know a lot of people had questions about how do they keep their cell phones safe and things like that.
You can disable the Bluetooth on your Apple Watch. You can put it on airplane mode, and so it will still count your steps or whatever it is you're trying to do. There's, by the way, never been any study that shows that counting the steps with the watch, first of all, is accurate, and secondly, that it really helps. But if it makes you feel better to have it, you can put it on airplane mode.
I'd just like to say one more thing. I'll make it real fast, but I have a flyer over there on the table at the back.
The
And
Safe Tech Tucson
the
table,
Safe Tech Tucson table
which I haven't been able to talk about, but Safe Tech Tucson is our group here in Tucson where we're advocating for safer placement of cell towers.
Yeah, use the microphone.
Safe Tech Tucson is our local group where we're advocating for safer placement of cell towers, educating people all over town, working to get better ordinances and safer ordinances. And you can meet us in the back there if you want to be on our email list or volunteer with us, and see us back in the corner. Okay, continue.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. We all get along really well, by the way, which is great. This flyer, this is a summary chart of that from a paper that ICBE-EMF published a couple of years ago, which challenges the FCC because we believe, based on our understanding of how these guidelines were designed, we understand what the problems are, what the invalid assumptions are that were used when they developed them, and who they're ignoring in the population, and what the problems are with the standards that are actually set. Now, there's a lot of detail to this. I'm not going to go into them because we don't have any time, but this chart has pictures and arrows and explanatory material that'll summarize for you what this paper is all about. And no, the FCC hasn't called us about it. We're still waiting to hear from them. And yes, it also addresses the standards set by this nonprofit ICNIRT that's based in Germany, funded by the industry. So we put this out because we had people on our team, including the scientists that managed the National Toxicology Program study on animals. He was a master in putting this together. A lot of expertise went into this. And then on the back, and you can pick up the flyer in the back, we show a phone, and we show the engineering fixes that would make these phones safer. And you can look at that too. There's a long paper to look at. If you want to look at that, it's at icbe-emf.org.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight, and check out the book. It's very good. It's very readable. I work at a medical journal, so sometimes science isn't readable, but Dr. Davis's book is very readable and easy to understand. It's got great information, and there still might be some water and refreshments, and talk to these people as they're mingling around. So thank you all for coming. I'm so glad you all were here.